So with the wrap up of content in Splatoon 3, there is one aspect of the game that I feel like has not been heavily addressed as it should have been. And that aspect is this game's accessibility. Now, what do I mean by accessibility in Splatoon? At least in terms of Splatoon's gameplay, accessibility is the ability to access everything in the game without having any external factors preventing you from doing so. And while for the most part the game does an alright job at it, it also does kind of an awful job at it at the same time. And when I say that, it's in multiple factors. This includes unnecessary mashing requirements, audio and visual cues that can cause actual negative effects towards someone's physical health, the game being overstimulating, especially to those with autism or any other form of neurodivergence, and a surprising lack of features for those who suffer with color blindness outside of the color lock mode. Now, when talking about specific examples of what I'm discussing here, it's kind of very obvious to point these out. For example, the very weapon you can see me using in the gameplay as I'm talking, Squeezer, is probably the biggest example of weapon accessibility and how bad it can be at its worst. Squeezer is arguably the best shooter weapon in the game right now, with stats so incredibly insane that it had to get nerfed over multiple patches, and it's still a very good weapon. Now, disregarding just how BS the weapon is, it wouldn't be that bad if everyone could just pick up the weapon and be fine. But the weapon is extremely difficult to play, especially for newer players, and it's all for one reason: the mash requirement. Now, the mash requirement with this weapon comes in the form of the weapon's two hybrid firing modes, with the main firing mode, the tap shot mode, having the most damage and the most range, being a 3-shot that is only 1 frame slower than Spotter Shot Pro to kill. And the biggest problem with this firing mode is that if you are not able to mash to the speed needed for this weapon to perform at its best, you're just not going to be able to get its maximum value, and you will inherently be not good enough to actually play the weapon. Its skill ceiling is unique, but for all the wrong reasons. If you cannot mash the right trigger fast enough, let alone aim while doing so, you're just not going to be able to actually effectively play Squeezer. Which means despite it being the best weapon in its class, you really don't see many people who are able to play this outside of top tier competitive play. And this issue also applies to Ink Brush. Ink Brush works very similar to Squeezer's tap shot mode. The more you spam the right trigger, the faster you swing your brush. And once again, it faces very similar problems to Squeezer's tap shot mode. If you're unable to mash your right trigger, you are unable to actually win most fights, especially because you will be swinging your weapon too slow to kill anything that would kill you in that same range. And while thankfully the weapon isn't necessarily needed in competitive play, considering it's not really outdoing anything even if you are mechanically skilled with the weapon, at a casual level it's still bad because that's a weapon you essentially aren't able to play because of its unnecessary mash requirement unless you are able to meet it, which is actually a very small percentage of players. And the worst part is that for some people, they just simply cannot learn how to mash. Due to a variety of physical conditions, some people are just unable to keep up with the mashing requirement without hurting themselves. And because of how these weapons are designed solely around the mash requirement, it is very difficult to just remove that whilst keeping the weapon's balance. In the case of Squeezer, if you make it a fully automatic weapon, it'll just become way too unbalanced and you'll have to ruin the weapon's performance just to make it balanced around its new fully auto fire. And an issue that isn't really discussed much but I think still holds a lot of value is just how bad mashing is for your controller. With how fast you have to mash the button after continuous periods of playing the same weapon and mashing your button for a very long time, it's going to obviously cause very bad wear and tear to your controller's triggers. And in a shooting game, you do not want your triggers to not work properly. So not only do mash requirements cause unnecessary barriers that force people to not play the weapon, it also negatively affects people who do play the weapon as it lowers the overall life of their controller. Now for visual and audio cues as well as overstimulation, this game is very infamous for that. With how colorful the game is, how many things go on at once during a match, and alongside that all the visual and audio cues that you need to keep up with in order to know what exactly is going on. It becomes clear just how demanding Splatoon is as a game, with you needing to memorize a bunch of audio and visual cues that can occur at any time and having to also understand how to react to said cues, which can be very stressful to the average player, but also especially to those who suffer with autism. And speaking from personal experience as well as the experiences of other people that are close in my life, Splatoon can become a very stress-inducing game, and I do not believe that is okay. And it's made even worse by the existence of specials like Splatter Color Screen that enhance those negative effects. Now, while the special has been patched in order to remove the negative visual effect from coming into contact with screen, the sound effect has not been altered at all. And I can speak from personal experience when I say this sound in particular is very off-putting and has even caused me headaches in some occasions. So as you can probably tell, a special that is designed with the sole intent of making it even more difficult to keep up with the game's massive array of audio and visual cues, on top of releasing an audio cue that discriminately affects people based on a condition that they cannot control, is quite possibly the worst mix of things you could ever have in a game like Splatoon. Now, for the last point that I want to touch on, I'm going to mainly talk about this game's color lock mode. Now, if you're unaware of what color lock mode is in Splatoon, it is essentially an option that allows you to set the paint colors to only a specific 2 colors every game. Now, this ensures that people who do suffer from colorblind issues can only see certain colors that they are able to see consistently, which removes any sort of confusion that may be caused by their condition. And while this is perfectly fine and dandy, I think the issue here is just the lack of options you get in this setting. You only get 2 variations of the color lock mode, those of which being a darker blue and orange, and a lighter blue and yellow, with additional colors made for tricolor mode as well. I think if they just added more options for color lock mode, it would make it a perfectly fine option, but as it stands, I feel like it just needs more work to actually be suitable for the people they're clearly catering to. Now, this video is not to say that Nintendo isn't doing enough of a job in terms of addressing issues like this, with changes such as the change to Splatter Color Screen's visual effect, and the consistent addition of color lock mode into all 3 Splatoon games so far. It's clear that Nintendo isn't blind to the issue. They definitely are aware of it and are trying things to actively make it not as bad to the player experience. However, I just do not believe it's enough as it stands. Many of the issues I've addressed in this video have gone untouched, such as the mash requirement problem, or the game simply being too overstimulating. And while it is unrealistic to expect them to change this within this game's lifetime, considering content is, of course, already done, I do hope with Splatoon 4 and onward it becomes a priority to deal with these problems, rather than leaving the issue unaddressed and just causing more people unnecessary harm. But with that, that's pretty much everything I have for this video. Kind of a more serious topic I wanted to touch on with this video, because I do believe accessibility should have always been a priority, and it does suck that it isn't as it stands. But I do believe with more increased discussion of this kind of issue, maybe it'll drive Nintendo to do something about it with future releases. But with that, thank you all for watching. If you have any opinions on what I've said today, leave them in the comments. I always read them. Have a good rest of your day or night, and I will see you all in my next upload.